let's look at some of the preventative and detective controls we can put in place to either, detect or prevent things from happening. IDSs and IPSs, intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems, can capture traffic on our networks and either alert it or block it if it's seen as malicious. And they can generally be divided into two types and two different approaches. If they're network-based, they sit on a certain segment of our network, and they see everything that's happening on that one segment. If they're host-based, they will be on a client, normally a server or a workstation, and they can be either signature or pattern matching, which is similar to an antivirus program. It has a ton of signatures of how malicious traffic looks. When traffic comes in, it looks for those patterns. If it's not one of those patterns, it ignores it. Heuristic or behavioral-based systems look at a normal traffic baseline, and then they monitor for anything outside of that normal baseline, which can give a lot of false positives, meaning we may block or alert on something that's just normal traffic. And as any of our other network devices, our firewalls, routers, server switches, they just see their little piece of the entire picture. If it's host-based, it just sees the client, and if it's network-based, it just sees that portion of the network. So to get the full picture, we use the SIM, which every system sends their information to, and it can then, with that much larger dataset, often see problems that the individual systems can't. On our intrusion prevention and detection systems, we have set up triggers and alerts. If this happens, then do this. And as the name indicates, intrusion detection system doesn't do anything. It doesn't act on the information. They monitor, and if something happens that's not supposed to, it will tell someone. That can be an email or a text sent to an administrator. It could just be a light that starts flashing on a monitor, but it takes no action. And then the intrusion prevention system. Yes, it prevents things. Is it nice how it's all logical? The intrusion prevention system will take an action if it sees malicious traffic. What it does depends on what we configured it for. Most of the stuff it sees, we probably don't want it to take action. Or it might just redirect traffic, or shut some ports down, or whatever we've told it to do in this case. And both the detection and the prevention systems are part of our layered defense. They are really just package sniffers with an analytics engine attached to them. And then they work on the simple if-then statements. If this happens, then do that. If this signature is seen, if abnormal traffic is seen, drop it, or black hole it, or whatever. For the network-based systems, we normally place them on a segment, meaning we plug in the IDS or the IPS into a switch port in promiscuous mode. We configure the port to be a span port, meaning any traffic that's sent on anywhere else on that switch is sent out the span port as well. We can capture all the traffic. And it is normally done on a single or an aggregate of switches. What we really can see is we can see the host and destination ports, the IPs, the protocols, some of the content of the traffic, but we can't see anything that's encrypted because that's layer 6. And they can help the SIM get that holistic picture and see everything that's happening on our network, and they can at times protect us against DDoS attacks, port scans, brute force attacks, and even policy violations. But they are just a small part of our layered defense. With the host-based detection systems, we look on one system. We can see what the system is doing, the resources, the traffic. We can even make it application specific. What we choose to monitor and how we monitor it is up to us. But like anything else, the more we monitor, the slower stuff gets. The big upside to the host-based detection systems is we see the unencrypted traffic. Because we're now at layer 7. Encryption and decryption happens at layer 6. There are also attacks that can turn off the host intrusion or prevention systems. Whereas with the network systems, we just analyze all the data that goes through the system. Both have pros, both have cons. In most environments, we'd use both to get that holistic security approach. Both the network and the host-based detection systems come in two varieties. Signature-based, it looks for signatures of well-known attacks. This is much faster. We just check to see if any of the malware signatures are available, are present in the traffic. If not, we let it pass. And it's super easy to set up and manage because someone else does the signatures. In most cases, it really just is plug and play. That's all the good stuff. Now the bad stuff. They are completely vulnerable to zero-day attacks. Since the system only checks against the signatures it knows about, and this is an entirely new attack, it will just let the traffic pass. And then we have to update the system constantly, because there are thousands of new signatures that gets pushed out every day. which then brings us to heuristic systems or behavioral based. I mentioned it looks for abnormal behavior and it can produce a lot of false positives. We need to build a baseline of what normal traffic looks like. That can take some time. And then anything outside of that it might trigger on. This will take a ton of tweaking because it detects anything that's out of the ordinary, not just attacks. What if we do employee evaluations once a year and the baseline we build outside of that? That might be abnormal traffic. Building and tweaking the heuristic profiles takes a lot more work and a lot more skill. Today, however, most systems are hybrid based, where they take both the signatures and the abnormalities, and it's very common to have the signature-based much more restrictive than the pattern-based. So now that we put all these fancy schmancy systems in place that detects both the signatures and the abnormalities, the attacker obviously needs to do something else. Then they develop attacks that can avoid detection. There are many different attacks, and many different ways they can try to fool our systems. For the exam, I would at least know these. They can use fragmentation. Basically, they just split up the packets in a new way that doesn't match the signature. Since the packets are reassembled at the destination, they can, for a while at least, avoid detection. Or the attacker can simply try to avoid defaults. If we know a certain attack or a certain type of intrusion would normally happen on this port and they change the port number. And just like anything else with IT security, it really is an arms race. We implement this countermeasure, then the clever hackers find, oh, we can circumvent this by doing that. Then we implement another countermeasure. Then they figure something else out, and it continues on and on. They can also use a large number of hosts or agents, where each of the attacking hosts only look at a couple of ports or a couple of hosts in our network. They might do it over some time, but if you have 1,000 or tens of thousands of attackers doing this, you can still get the same information that a regular attack would, but you might not be detected. It's also very common for an attacker to find proxy servers that are either configured wrong or have bad security, and then use those to bounce an attack, which then makes it more difficult for intrusion systems to detect. And similar to the fragmentation, you can also just change the pattern a little bit. Changing the signature might be enough to get past the detection, and because it is ever evolving, that's why we need the layered defense. The alerts on our intrusion prevention and detection systems are the same that we use for our biometrics. We don't normally talk about the true states because things are happening like they're supposed to. But for the exam, know all four. And I have had students that said, that doesn't seem logical, it's counterintuitive, so bear with me. A true positive is an attack is happening, the system sees it, and it does what it's supposed to be doing. Blocking, alerting, whatever. And don't think of positive and negative as good or bad. Think of it as positively identifying something as a threat. And true, meaning the system does what it's supposed to do. So true positive, meaning there's a threat and the system acts correctly. True negative, that's our normal traffic. The system sees its normal traffic and does nothing. Again, it's not a threat and it does what it's supposed to be. The false positives was what we talked about earlier. Normal traffic, the system sees it as malicious and it does something, blocks it, reports on it, whatever. It's seen as a threat and it is a false threat. And then finally a false negative. An attack is happening, the system may or may not see it, but it does nothing. It doesn't see it as an attack. And the reason we don't very often talk about the true states is obviously things are working like they should. When they're not working the way they should, that's when we worry.